The sterile smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol would forever be etched into the memory of Izuku Midoriya. It was the scent of a dying dream. Rain lashed against the frosted glass window of the doctor's office, the heavy drops sounding like a scattering of pebbles against the pane. Outside, the sky over Muzidafu was a bruised, heavy gray, weeping over a city teeming with wonders. In this world, the extraordinary was mundane. Men could fly, women could conjure fire from their fingertips, and children could manipulate gravity before they even learned to ride a bicycle. 80% of the human population possessed a unique, supernatural ability known as a quirk. Izuku had spent all 4 years of his short life waiting for his. He had dreamed of it, prayed for it, sketched endless possibilities in his crayon-filled notebooks. Would he breathe fire like his father, Hisashi? Would he attract small objects like his mother, Inko? Or would it be a magnificent combination of both? Perhaps he could pull fire toward him, or breathe out telekinetic waves. Whatever it was, he knew exactly what he would do with it. He would become a hero. Just like All Might. But as Izuku sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table, clutching his All Might action figure so tightly his knuckles turned white, the crushing weight of reality was about to descend upon him. Dr. Tsubasa, a bald man with a bushy mustache and a pair of customized goggles resting on his forehead, let out a long, heavy sigh. He didn't look at Izuku. He looked at the clipboard in his hands, then at the glowing X-ray pinned to the light board on the wall. "You should probably give it up," the doctor said. The words were spoken casually, almost carelessly, but they struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The world seemed to stop spinning. The hum of the fluorescent lights above grew deafeningly loud. Izuku's breath hitched in his throat, his wide, emerald eyes locking onto the doctor in pure, unfiltered shock. He felt a sudden, icy numbness spreading from his chest to his fingertips. He dropped his action figure. It hit the linoleum floor with a hollow clack. Inko Midoriya, sitting in the chair beside the examination table, gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Give it up?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "Doctor, surely there's some mistake. The other children at kindergarten, they've all started manifesting their quirks. Izuku is just a late bloomer, isn't he? My husband breathes fire, and I can pull small objects," she demonstrated, extending a hand toward the fallen All Might toy. With a soft hum of effort, the plastic figure hovered off the floor and floated into her waiting palm. She held it out as if it were proof that her son could not be defective. Dr. Tsubasa leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his clipboard. "It's a common misconception, Mrs. Midoriya. While it is true that quirks are largely hereditary, manifesting by the age of 4, the true indicator of a quirk lies within human anatomy. Specifically, the joints in the pinky toe." He pointed to the X-ray on the wall, tapping the skeletal image of a foot. When quirks first began appearing, research discovered a link between the absence of the extra joint in the small toe and the presence of a genetic mutation, a quirk. It's an evolutionary step forward. The doctor turned his gaze to Izuku. The boy was frozen, his mouth slightly open, a tremor starting in his lower lip. "Your son, however, possesses 2 joints in his pinky toe," Dr. Tsubasa continued, his tone clinical, entirely devoid of the empathy required to shatter a child's universe. "His genetic makeup is perfectly aligned with the older evolutionary model of humanity. He possesses no meta-abilities. He is quirkless. And he always will be, quirkless." The word echoed in Izuku's mind. It wasn't just a medical diagnosis. In this society, it was a brand. A permanent marker of inferiority. It meant being left behind while the rest of the world soared into the sky. It meant the posters on his wall, the notebooks on his desk, the hopeful smiles in the mirror, were all for nothing. The rest of the appointment was a blur. Izuku didn't hear his mother's tearful questions or the doctor's patronizing reassurances. He felt as though he were trapped underwater, watching the world move in slow motion, the sounds muffled and distorted. The walk home was a silent, agonizing procession. Inko held her yellow umbrella over Izuku, letting the cold rain soak her own shoulder. She looked down at her son, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Izuku's head was bowed, his oversized red shoes splashing through the puddles without their usual youthful bounce. He stared blankly at the wet pavement, the All Might figure clutched loosely in his hand, its bright, painted-on smile feeling like a cruel mockery. When they reached their apartment, the silence only deepened. The apartment was cozy, filled with framed photographs, soft carpets, and the lingering scent of katsudan, Izuku's favorite meal, which Inko had prepared in anticipation of celebrating his quirk. Now, the smell only made them both feel nauseous. Izuku didn't take off his shoes immediately. He stood in the Genkan, staring at the wall. "Izuku, sweetie," Inko began, her voice cracking. She knelt down to his level, reaching out to touch his cheek. "Are you hungry? I made your favorite." Izuku slowly shook his head. "I want to use the computer," he whispered, his voice incredibly small, fragile as spun glass. Inko swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. Okay, sweetie." Minutes later, the only light in the living room came from the glow of the computer monitor. Izuku sat in the rolling chair, his legs dangling above the floor, the headphones clamped over his ears. On the screen was a video he had watched 1,000 times. It was an old clip, grainy and chaotic, filmed during a massive disaster in a city miles away. The footage showed ruined buildings, roaring flames, and terrified civilians. And then, from the smoke, a massive, muscular figure emerged. He was carrying a dozen people on his back and in his arms. He stood tall amidst the destruction, turning his face to the camera. "Fear not, citizens!" the man on the screen bellowed, his voice filled with an unshakable, booming confidence. "Hope has arrived. Because I am here." It was All Might, the symbol of peace. The #1 hero. Izuku watched the video. Then he rewound it. And watched it again. "Because I am here," he rewound it. "Because I am here." He didn't know how long he sat there, bathing in the flickering light of the monitor. The hero's booming laugh, a sound that had always brought Izuku unparalleled joy and comfort, now felt like a knife twisting in his chest. A hero saves everyone with a smile. A hero is fearless. A hero has a quirk. Behind him, the door creaked open. Inko stood in the doorway, the hallway light casting a long, sad shadow across the floor. She looked at her son, bathed in the glow of his impossible dream. The sight of his small, shaking shoulders broke whatever resolve she had left. Slowly Izuku turned his head. His eyes were red, brimming with tears that spilled over his freckled cheeks. He pointed a trembling finger at the computer screen. "Mom!" Izuku's voice broke, a wet, devastating sound. He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what trouble they're in. He's so cool. Izuku slowly turned his chair to face her. The tears flowed freely now, tracking down his face, dripping off his chin. He looked at his mother with a desperation that no 4-year-old should ever possess. "Can I be a hero too?" It was a plea. A desperate cry for someone, anyone, to tell him that the doctor was wrong, that the world was wrong, that he could still matter. Inko ran to him. She fell to her knees, throwing her arms around his small body and pulling him into a desperate, crushing hug. She buried her face in his shoulder, her own tears soaking his shirt. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she wailed, her voice thick with grief and guilt. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." That wasn't what he wanted to hear. It wasn't the answer he needed. In that moment, surrounded by his mother's tears and the echoing laughter of the hero on the screen, Izuku Midoriya felt his spirit shatter. The world had made its ruling. He was quirkless. He was weak, but as Izuku sat there, crying into his mother's shoulder, a strange, terrifying sensation began to stir deep within the recesses of his chest. It wasn't a quirk. It wasn't a manifestation of fire or telekinesis. It was something primal. Something dark, cold, and immensely powerful, resting dormant in his blood. A spark of pure, unadulterated will, reacting to the trauma of his shattered reality. He didn't know it then, but the doctor's X-ray had only told half the truth. Izuku Midoriya was indeed quirkless. But he was not normal. 2 hours later, the tears had dried, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. Inko had tucked Izuku into bed, pulling the All Might-themed blanket up to his chin. She kissed his forehead, her eyes puffy and red, and quietly shut the door, leaving the door cracked just enough to let a sliver of hallway light spill into the room. Izuku lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The rain continued to batter the window. The apartment was deathly silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then, the silence was broken. It didn't start with a knock. It started with a tremor. The floorboards vibrated, followed instantly by a deafening crash that shook the entire building. Izuku bolted upright in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound had come from the front of the apartment. Ah! He heard his mother scream, a sound of pure terror. Who are you? What are you doing in my home? Target located, a deep, mechanically filtered voice replied. Secure the woman. Find the boy. Izuku threw off his covers, his small body trembling violently. He slipped out of bed, creeping toward the slightly open door. He peeked through the crack into the hallway, which offered a view of the living room. What he saw froze the blood in his veins. The front door of their apartment was completely gone, blown off its hinges and splintered into pieces across the Genken. Standing in their living room were three men. They did not look like heroes, nor did they look like regular villains. They looked like soldiers. They were clad in sleek, charcoal gray tactical armor, their faces obscured by opaque black helmets with glowing red visors. They held short, suppressed submachine guns, the barrels sweeping the room with lethal efficiency. Emblazoned on their shoulder pauldrons was a white, stylized G. Inko was backed against the kitchen counter, her eyes wide with panic. She raised a trembling hand, trying to use her quirk. A kitchen knife rattled in its block, slowly floating into the air toward her. One of the soldiers didn't even flinch. He raised his weapon and fired a single, silenced shot. Pfft! The bullet struck the knife out of the air, shattering the blade and embedding itself in the wall inches from Inko's face. She shrieked, collapsing to the floor, covering her head. Resistance is futile, Inko Midoriya, the lead soldier said, his voice stripped of all humanity by his helmet's modulator. By order of the Executive Board of G Corporation, you and your offspring have been deemed liabilities. The Kanzuya bloodline ends tonight. Kanzuya? Izuku thought, his breath catching. Who was Kanzuya? His father's name was Hisashi. What were these men talking about? Where is the boy? The leader demanded, stepping closer to Inko. He raised a heavy, armored boot and pressed it against her shoulder, pinning her to the linoleum. Make this easy, woman. The suppression units have locked down the building. No heroes are coming for you. I don't know what you're talking about. Inko sobbed, struggling uselessly against the soldier's weight. Please! We don't have money. My husband is overseas. Your husband, the soldier sneered, is Kanzuya Mishima. And he has authorized your execution. The soldier raised his weapon, pointing the barrel directly at Inko's head. A primal instinct took over Izuku. He was 4 years old. He was quirkless. He was terrified. But as he watched a gun pointed at his mother, the dark, latent spark that had flared in his chest earlier suddenly roared to life. His vision tinted faintly red. He didn't think, he simply moved. Izuku threw the door open and sprinted down the hallway. Mom! He screamed. He didn't know what he planned to do. He just knew he had to put himself between the gun and his mother. He ran into the living room, his small bare feet slapping against the wood floor, and threw himself in front of the lead soldier, spreading his arms wide. Leave her alone! Izuku yelled, tears streaming down his face, his small chest heaving. His legs shook so violently he could barely stand, but he refused to move. The 3G Corporation soldiers paused, their red visors locking onto the small boy. Izuku! No! Run! Inko screamed, reaching out to grab him, but a second soldier stepped forward, driving the butt of his rifle into her back, keeping her pinned. Target confirmed, the leader said, tilting his head. Izuku Midoriya. Or rather, Izuku Mishima. You look just like him. The leader raised his gun, aiming it squarely at Izuku's chest. Goodbye, little devil. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. He braced for the impact, for the pain, for the end of a life that had only just been declared worthless by the world. But the gunshot never came. Instead, a monstrous roar of tearing metal and shattering concrete violently ruptured the night. The exterior wall of the living room, brick, plaster, and glass, exploded inward. A storm of debris showered the apartment. The G-Corp soldiers were thrown off balance by the concussive force, lowering their weapons as the wind and rain from the outside storm howled into the room. Izuku opened his eyes, shielding his face with his arms. Through the massive, gaping hole in the wall, a helicopter hovered outside, its searchlights cutting through the driving rain and blinding the room. But it wasn't the helicopter that drew Izuku's attention. It was the figures dropping from it. 4 men landed in the ruined living room with heavy thuds that cracked the floorboards. But unlike the sleek, modern mercenaries of G-Corp, these men wore heavy, militaristic combat armor that looked almost samurai-esque in design. Dark green and black plating, heavy gauntlets, and visored helmets that resembled menacing Oni masks. The Tekken Force. Before the G-Corp soldiers could even raise their weapons to respond, the Tekken Force moved with blinding, brutal speed. They didn't just shoot, they utilized lethal, bone-shattering martial arts. One Tekken Force soldier closed the distance to a G-Corp merc in a fraction of a second, grabbing the barrel of the submachine gun, snapping the man's wrist, and delivering a devastating roundhouse kick to his helmet that sent him crashing through a coffee table. Gunfire erupted, the flashes illuminating the dark room, but the Tekken Force were too fast, their movements synchronized and utterly ruthless. Within seconds, 2 of the G-Corp mercenaries were dead on the floor, their armor crushed, their weapons discarded. The lead G-Corp soldier, the one who had threatened Inko, scrambled backward, his gun raised, firing wildly into the dark, smoke-filled room. "Hold your fire!" A voice boomed from the darkness outside the ruined wall. It was not a command through a radio. It was a raw, human roar that carried the weight of an earthquake. The sheer volume and authority of the voice made the air itself vibrate. The Tekken Force soldiers instantly ceased their assault, parting down the middle of the room and dropping to one knee in perfect, synchronized obedience. From the hovering helicopter, a figure stepped out, dropping 2 stories down into the ruined apartment. He didn't bend his knees when he landed. The impact cratered the floorboards beneath his feet, sending spiderwebs of cracked wood across the room. As the smoke cleared and the helicopter's searchlight washed over him, Izuku beheld the most terrifying human being he had ever seen. The man was elderly, but his physique was monstrous, built like a fortress of muscle and scar tissue beneath a dark gray martial arts gi. His skin was tanned and weathered like old leather, and his hair flared out in 2 distinct, silver, wing-like points on either side of his bald head. A thick mustache sat above a grim, predatory scowl. But it was his aura that suffocated the room. Faint arcs of purple and black electricity crackled around his massive forearms. The air grew heavy, smelling of ozone and copper. The man radiated a pressure so immense that Izuku felt it in his teeth. Heihachi Mishima had arrived. The G-Corp leader, shaking with terror, leveled his weapon at Heihachi. Mishima! You old bastard, you're supposed to be. Heihachi didn't let him finish. He moved with a speed that defied his massive frame and age. In the blink of an eye, he crossed the room. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't use a quirk. He simply pivoted his hips, his right fist pulling back, gathering a surging maelstrom of crackling electricity. "Dariya!" Heihachi bellowed. He drove his fist forward, striking an uppercut into the chest plate of the armored soldier. The impact sounded like a cannon firing. The electric wind god fist. The G-Corp soldier was launched backward with concussive force, his armor completely caving in. He blasted through the drywall, through the hallway, and out the front door, crashing into the stairwell outside. He did not get up. Silence descended upon the apartment, save for the howling wind blowing through the destroyed wall and the rhythmic thrum of the helicopter blades outside. Heihachi stood amidst the wreckage, slowly lowering his smoking fist. He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet. He turned his head, his sharp, predatory eyes sweeping the room until they landed on the trembling forms of Inko and Izuku. Inko pulled Izuku against her, shielding him with her body, staring up at the towering giant in abject terror. Who are you?" Inko stammered, tears mixing with the dust on her face. "What is happening? Where is Hisashi?" Heihachi looked down at her. His expression was a mixture of disgust and cold calculation. "Hisashi Midoriya," Heihachi spoke, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble, "is a ghost. A fabrication. A pathetic pseudonym used by a coward to hide from his destiny." Inko shook her head, clutching Izuku tighter. No, that's my husband. He works overseas. He works for G Corporation," Heihachi interrupted, stepping closer, his wooden Geta sandals clacking menacingly against the ruined floor. He is their shadowy patron, their newly appointed leader, and his real name is Kazuya Mishima. He is my son. Inko stared at him, the words washing over her, refusing to compute. No. Hisashi is a kind man. He breathes fire. He loves us. He breathes fire to mimic a quirk, Heihachi sneered, disgusted by the notion. A parlor trick to blend in with this pathetic society of heroes and villains. The power Kazuya wields is far older, and far darker, than any quirk. He does not love you, woman. You are a hiding place. An incubator. And now that he has seized control of G-Corp, he is tying up his loose ends. He sent these dogs to slaughter you and the boy to ensure no leverage could ever be used against him. Inko buried her face in Izuku's hair, sobbing uncontrollably, her entire reality fracturing for the second time that day. Her husband, the man she loved, was a lie. A warlord who had just ordered their execution, but Izuku did not cry. He stayed tucked under his mother's arm, but he turned his head, looking up at the towering titan before him. Heihachi Mishima. His grandfather. Heihachi's piercing gaze shifted from the weeping woman down to the 4-year-old boy. The old martial artist narrowed his eyes, studying the child. He saw the freckles, the green hair, the small, fragile frame. By all accounts, the boy looked weak. Pathetic. A civilian. But then, Heihachi looked into Izuku's eyes. Despite the tears, despite the terror, Izuku was not looking away. He was staring directly back at Heihachi. In those wide, emerald eyes, Heihachi saw a reflection of the fire that burned in the Mishima blood. He saw the boy who had just thrown his tiny, powerless body in front of a loaded gun to protect his mother, and deeper still, beneath the surface of the boy's pupils, Heihachi sensed it. The dormant, sleeping beast. The devil gene, inherited from Kazuya, suppressed by the boy's innocence, but waiting. Heihachi's scowl slowly morphed into a dark, terrifying grin. So, Heihachi rumbled, leaning down slightly, his shadow swallowing Izuku. You are Kazuya's spawn. Tell me, boy. Do you possess a quirk? Izuku swallowed hard. The memory of the doctor's office flashed in his mind. Give it up. And no, Izuku whispered, his voice shaking, but he forced himself to speak. I'm quirkless. Heihachi threw his head back and let out a booming, cruel laugh that shook the remaining windows. Quirkless. Heihachi roared, finding the concept endlessly amusing. This foolish society and its reliance on genetic lottery tickets. You are not quirkless, boy. You are a Mishima. The blood of kings, of conquerors, flows in your veins. Quirks are for the weak who need a crutch. We use our fists. Heihachi stopped laughing and looked down at Inko. Listen closely, woman, Heihachi commanded, his tone brokering no argument. G-Corporation will not stop. Kazuya will not stop. As long as you remain in this pathetic city, as long as you pretend to be a normal family, you are prey. Kazuya's assassins will return, and they will butcher you both. Inko looked up, her face pale with terror. Please, please help us. Protect us. I'll do anything. I have no interest in protecting a civilian, Heihachi scoffed. However, the boy possesses the bloodline of the Mishima Zaibatsu. He is my grandson. I will not allow Kazuya to snuff out his own blood to consolidate his power. Heihachi pointed a massive, calloused finger at Izuku. I am taking the boy. Inko gasped, her eyes widening in horror. She gripped Izuku so tightly it hurt. No! No, you can't! He's my son! He's just a little boy. You can't take him. If I leave him here, he dies, Heihachi stated coldly. If I take him, he lives. I will take him to the Mishima estate. I will strip the weakness from his bones. I will break him, rebuild him, and teach him the Mishima-style fighting karate. He will become the weapon that destroys Kazuya, and he will become the heir to the Mishima Zaibatsu. No! Inko shrieked, scrambling backward, dragging Izuku with her. I'll go to the police. I'll go to the pro-heroes. All Might will protect us, Heihachi sneered at the mention of the name. All Might is a dancing fool in a brightly colored costume. He plays cops and robbers. The Mishima Zaibatsu controls nations. We command armies. There is no hero in this world who can protect you from G Corporation, save for me. Refuse, and you both die tonight. Inko wept, shaking her head, holding Izuku as if trying to merge him back into her own body. Please, please. Izuku watched his mother cry. He watched the absolute despair ravaging her face. He remembered her tears from just a few hours ago, in his bedroom, apologizing for something she couldn't control. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. He looked at Heihachi. He looked at the imposing, terrifying power the man wielded. The man who had destroyed the monsters that were going to kill his mother. Izuku Midoriya was 4 years old. His dream of being a hero like All Might had been shattered by a doctor's diagnosis. His quiet, peaceful life had been shattered by mercenaries. His father was a lie, but as he looked at his weeping mother, Izuku realized something profound. If a hero is someone who sacrifices themselves to save others, then he didn't need a quirk to do it. He just needed to make a choice. Gently, Izuku pulled himself out of his mother's frantic grip. Izuku? Inko whispered, confused and terrified. Izuku stood up. His legs were still shaking, but he locked his knees. He turned to face the giant, Heihachi Mishima. If I go with you, Izuku said, his voice quiet, trembling, yet carrying a strange, eerie calm, will you leave my mom alone? Will she be safe? Heihachi raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by the boy's composure. The fire in those emerald eyes was burning brighter now. I will ensure she is placed under the protection of the Mishima Zaibatsu's covert division, Heihachi promised, his voice devoid of warmth, but carrying the weight of an ironclad contract. Kanzuya's dogs will never find her. Izuku turned back to his mother. He forced a smile. It wasn't the booming, confident smile of All Might. It was a small, fragile, heartbreakingly sad smile of a little boy saying goodbye. It's okay, Mom, Izuku lied. I'll go with him. Izuku, no! Inko screamed, reaching for him, but 2 Tekken Force soldiers stepped forward, gently but firmly restraining her. She thrashed against them, sobbing hysterically. Let him go! Izuku, don't leave me! Please! Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, threatening to spill over, but he bit his lips so hard it bled, refusing to cry in front of his grandfather. He turned his back on his mother, unable to bear the sound of her heartbreak. Come, boy, Heihachi commanded, turning toward the gaping hole in the wall. Izuku followed. He walked past the wreckage of his living room. He walked past the shattered remnants of his childhood. As he neared the edge of the ruined floor, where the rain was whipping inside, his foot bumped against something hard. He looked down. Half buried in the drywall dust was his All Might action figure. The paint was chipped, and the plastic was cracked from the battle, but the hero was still smiling that wide, fearless smile. Izuku stopped. He stared at the toy. The symbol of everything he had ever wanted. The dream of saving people with a smile, in the light, adored by everyone. What are you waiting for, boy? Heihachi's voice boomed over the sound of the helicopter. Leave your childish toys behind. Where you are going, there are no heroes. Izuku slowly reached down. His small fingers brushed against the plastic of All Might's cape. He lingered there for a second, feeling the smooth surface. Then, he pulled his hand away. He stood up, leaving the All Might figure in the dust. He stepped forward, out into the biting wind and the freezing rain, and walked toward the waiting helicopter. He didn't know what the Mishima Zaibatsu was. He didn't know the horrors of the training that awaited him. He didn't know the dark, demonic curse that slumbered in his bloodline, waiting to be awakened by pain and rage. All Izuku Midoriya knew was that his mother was safe, and that his life as a normal boy was over. As the helicopter ascended into the stormy sky, flying away from the ruined apartment, Izuku looked down at the shrinking city of Mizurifu. The city of heroes. Heihachi sat across from him, arms crossed, eyes closed, a terrifying monument of violent power. Izuku looked down at his own small, trembling hands. They were not the hands of a hero. Not anymore. They were the hands of a Mishima. And as a faint, almost imperceptible spark of purple electricity danced across his knuckles, Izuku made a silent vow. He would survive this man. He would survive this bloodline. And one day, no matter what it took, he would return. He just hoped his soul would survive the journey. The Mishima estate was not a home. It was a forge. Nestled deep within the treacherous, snow-capped peaks of the Japanese Alps, far from the bustling, quirk-obsessed society of the lowlands, the sprawling compound was an architectural marvel of feudal Japanese design laced with state-of-the-art military technology. High stone walls, patrolled by the elite, Onimastekan force, surrounded vast courtyards of raked gravel and ancient pine trees. But despite the serene aesthetic, the air was perpetually thick with an oppressive, suffocating tension. For 8 years, this fortress had been Izuku Midoriya's entire world. He was 12 years old now. The soft, rounded cheeks of the crying 4-year-old who had left his all-might figure in the dust were long gone, replaced by sharp, bruised angles and a jawline set in permanent, stoic endurance. His unruly green hair was cut short, military style, though it still rebelliously curled at the ends. He wore only a pair of traditional white GI pants, his bare torso glistening with sweat in the freezing mountain air. His upper body, though small, was corded with dense, wiry muscle, cross-hatched with faded white scars and fresh, blossoming purple bruises. Crack! Izuku's head snapped back violently as a massive fist, wrapped in rough, blood-stained fighter's tape, collided with his jaw. The force of the blow lifted his feet entirely off the polished wooden floor of the grand dojo, sending him skidding backward across the boards until his back slammed into the thick wooden pillar at the edge of the sparring ring. He coughed, spitting a glob of metallic-tasting blood onto the floor, and forced his eyes open. His vision swam for a fraction of a second before focusing on the towering, mountainous silhouette standing in the center of the room. Heihachi Mishima did not look a day older than he had 8 years ago. If anything, the old warlord looked larger, more imposing. He stood with his hands resting casually on his hips, his silver, winged hair bristling with static electricity. He wasn't even breathing hard. Pathetic, Heihachi's voice boomed, echoing off the high wooden rafters of the dojo. You hesitate. You pull your punches at the very moment of impact. You calculate the minimum amount of force required to incapacitate, rather than the maximum amount required to destroy. It is a sickening habit, boy. A habit born of weakness. Izuku pushed himself off the pillar. His legs trembled slightly, but he immediately dropped into a low, wide stance, bringing his fists up to guard his face. The goal of combat is to defeat the opponent, grandfather, Izuku said, his voice respectful but strained, devoid of the terrified stutter that used to define him. Not to kill them. Unnecessary brutality leaves openings. Heihachi's eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. Unnecessary? In the real world, the world of the Zaibatsu, there is no such thing as unnecessary brutality. There is only survival and death, conqueror and conquered. The Mishima-style fighting karate was not forged to arrest petty purse snatchers. It was forged to break the bones of gods and men. Heihachi took a step forward, the floorboards groaning in agony beneath his weight. You cling to the childish delusions of the society down below. You still harbor fantasies of being a hero in a cape. You think you can use my martial arts to save kittens from trees? I think, Izuku replied, shifting his weight, his emerald eyes locked onto Heihachi's shoulders to read his muscle twitches, that true strength is having the power to destroy, and the discipline to choose otherwise. Heihachi roared in absolute fury. It was a guttural, terrifying sound. He closed the distance between them with a speed that defied the laws of physics. Izuku's kinetic vision, honed through years of relentless, agonizing beatdowns, tracked the movement. Heihachi was executing a demon's scissors, launching himself into the air for a devastating, spinning double kick. Izuku didn't try to block. Blocking Heihachi Mishima was like trying to block a bullet train with a wooden shield. Instead, Izuku ducked, pivoting on his left heel and sweeping his right leg out in a lightning-fast hell sweep. His shin connected with Heihachi's planted ankle just as the old man launched. It was a perfect tactical counter, executed with flawless precision. For a microsecond, Heihachi's balance faltered, but Izuku had forgotten one crucial, terrifying detail. Heihachi was not bound by mortal physics. Instead of falling, Heihachi used the momentum of Izuku's sweep to spin faster, turning his falling body into a mid-air pivot. His massive, calloused hand shot out, grabbing Izuku by the throat. Izuku choked, his eyes widening as Heihachi slammed him face first into the wooden floor with a force that splintered the hardwood. Before Izuku could even process the pain, Heihachi hoisted him back up into the air by his neck, holding the 12-year-old boy suspended, feet kicking uselessly in the cold air. Tactics. Precision. Discipline, Heihachi spat, tightening his grip, cutting off Izuku's airway. All useless without the intent to kill. Without Satsue no Hado. You fight with your mind, boy. You must fight with your blood. You have the devil within you, just as Kanzuya does. I can smell it. Yet you cage it with this sickening morality. Izuku grabbed Heihachi's massive wrist with both hands, his knuckles turning white as he desperately tried to pry the fingers away. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. I will never be like him, Izuku choked out, his voice a ragged rasp. I am not a monster. Heihachi stared into Izuku's defiant, fading green eyes. The old man's expression shifted from rage to a cold, calculating disappointment. He loosened his grip just enough to let Izuku gasp a ragged breath of air, then unceremoniously dropped the boy onto the ruined floorboards. Izuku collapsed, clutching his bruised throat, coughing violently as oxygen rushed back into his burning lungs. Normal training will no longer suffice, Heihachi muttered, looking down at his grandson. 8 years I have beaten you, broken your bones, forced you to fight my Tekken force until you collapsed in pools of your own blood. Your body has adapted. Your mind has sharpened. You have mastered the forms of the Mishima style. But your spirit remains disgustingly pure. Heihachi turned his back on the gasping boy, walking toward the grand sliding doors of the dojo. We are leaving, boy. Put on your boots. It is time we observe a family tradition. Izuku, still coughing, pushed himself up onto his elbows. A cold dread settled in his stomach, far colder than the mountain air. Where are we going? Heihachi paused at the door, glancing back over his massive shoulder. His eyes gleamed with a dark, terrible finality. To awaken the devil? Or bury the boy? The helicopter ride was deafeningly silent, save for the mechanical roar of the twin rotors cutting through the violent atmospheric pressure of the high altitudes. Izuku sat strapped into the leather seat, wearing a thick, military-grade winter coat over his GI, his bruised hands resting on his knees. He looked out the window. They were flying higher into the Alps, away from the estate, into a region of jagged, inhospitable peaks where the snow never melted and the wind howled like wounded animals. He knew about the devil. Heihachi had not kept it a secret. It was the reason he had been taken. Kanzuya Mishima, Izuku's biological father, possessed a genetic mutation far older and far more sinister than any modern-day quirk. The devil gene. It was a sentient, parasitic manifestation of absolute power and rage that fed on hatred. Heihachi believed that Izuku, being Kanzuya's son, carried this dormant gene. The old man's entire pedagogy was designed to push Izuku to a state of such absolute physical and emotional despair that the devil would be forced to awaken to save the host. But Izuku had spent 8 years building mental fortresses. Every time the pain became too great, every time he felt a dark, violent urge bubbling up from the darkest corners of his soul, he thought of his mother. He thought of her gentle smile, her soft hands, her absolute belief in his goodness. He thought of the heroes he still idolized in secret, reading about their exploits on smuggled, encrypted tablets late at night. A hero saves people with a smile. A hero protects. Those thoughts were his anchor. They kept the darkness at bay. The helicopter banked sharply, descending toward a narrow plateau that jutted out over an impossibly deep, jagged ravine. The pilot brought the aircraft down, the skids crunching against the hard-packed snow and ice. The side door slid open, letting in a blast of sub-zero wind that cut right through Izuku's coat. Out, Heihachi commanded. Izuku unbuckled his harness and stepped out onto the frozen plateau. The wind was so fierce he had to lean into it just to remain upright. He walked toward the edge of the plateau, looking down. It was a sheer drop. The cliff face was a vertical wall of jagged black rock and ice, descending into a misty abyss so deep the bottom was entirely obscured by swirling clouds of snow and shadow. If someone fell down there would be no body to recover. Heihachi walked up beside him, his massive frame completely unaffected by the freezing gale. He stood at the edge, looking down into the abyss with a look of nostalgic reverence. Do you know the legend of the lion boy? Heihachi asked, his voice effortlessly cutting through the howling wind. Izuku kept his eyes on the abyss. A lion throws its cubs into a deep ravine. It only raises the ones who have the strength to climb back up. Precisely, Heihachi said. It is the ultimate culling of weakness. Nature demands survival of the fittest. When your father, Kazuya, was a boy, no older than you are now, he was weak, he possessed a frail spirit. He cried for his mother. He abhorred violence. He was a disappointment. Heihachi turned his gaze to Izuku. So I brought him here. To this very cliff. And I threw him into the abyss. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He looked up at his grandfather, his emerald eyes wide with realization. He knew Heihachi was brutal, but to throw his own son down a mountain. And he survived? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. He did, Heihachi smiled, a cruel, terrifying expression. The fall shattered his body. He should have died on impact, but in his final moments of despair, as he lay broken in the dark, he realized the truth of the world. He realized that I was right. He embraced his hatred for me. He embraced his rage, and in doing so, he awakened the devil. He climbed back up this cliff, reborn not as my son, but as a demon of vengeance. Heihachi stepped in front of Izuku, blocking the boy's path back to the helicopter. You are stronger than Kazuya was at your age. Your technique is flawless. Your endurance is legendary among my troops. But you are infected with the same disease he had, compassion. You refuse to hate. You refuse to kill. You refuse to claim your birthright as a Mishima. Izuku took a step back, his boots crunching on the snow. His heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Grandfather, no. I can fight. I can lead the Zaibatsu. I don't need the devil to do it. Words, Heihachi spat. Empty, cowardly words. I am done waiting for you to unleash your potential. If you will not summon the devil in the dojo, you will summon it in the abyss, or you will shatter on the rocks below, and I will be rid of a defective heir. Heihachi lunged. Izuku's instincts fired. He didn't try to fight back, he tried to evade. He initiated a backward handspring, attempting to put distance between himself and the monster, but the snow was slick, and his heavy boots threw off his timing by a fraction of a second. That fraction of a second was all Heihachi needed. A massive, calloused hand closed around the collar of Izuku's winter coat and gi, lifting the 12-year-old boy off the ground with a single, effortless motion. Izuku thrashed, grabbing Heihachi's arm, his legs kicking wildly over the edge of the precipice. Grandfather! Stop! Please! Scream all you want, boy, Heihachi said, his face inches from Izuku's, his breath smelling of bitter tea and absolute malice. Hate me. Curse my name. Let the rage consume you. Only the devil can survive the fall. Awaken it, or die. With a roar that rivaled the mountain wind, Heihachi Mishima hurled his grandson out over the abyss. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku felt the fabric of his coat slip from Heihachi's grip. For a singular, weightless moment, he was suspended in the freezing air, staring into the cold, merciless eyes of his grandfather. Then, gravity reclaimed him. Izuku fell. The wind instantly became a deafening roar in his ears, tearing the breath from his lungs. The sheer cliff face blurred into a streaking wall of gray and black. He tumbled helplessly, his arms and legs flailing as the velocity increased. He actually did it. He threw me away. Panic, absolute and primal, consumed him. He tried to reach out, to grab onto a jutting rock, a root, anything. His fingers scraped against the jagged ice of the cliff wall, tearing his fingernails down to the quick, leaving streaks of blood on the white frost. It was useless. He was falling too fast. Crack! His left shoulder slammed into an outcropping of rock. The impact was agonizing, accompanied by the sickening sound of bones splintering. Izuku screamed, the sound whipped away by the wind. He spun out of control, careening deeper into the misty dark. He fell for what felt like an eternity. The light from the plateau above vanished, swallowed by the swirling gloom of the ravine. This is it. I'm going to die. The thought wasn't a question. It was a terrifying certainty. He was going to die here, alone in the dark, a failed experiment of a madman. He would never see his mother again. He would never go to a high school. He would never be a hero. Crash! He tore through the thick branches of a dead, ancient pine tree jutting from the cliffside, the thick, frozen wood tearing his coat to shreds and lacerating his face and chest. And then, the bottom rushed up to meet him. Izuku hit the rocky floor of the ravine with a catastrophic impact. The sound of his own body breaking echoed off the stone walls. His right leg snapped. His ribs caved inward. His head whipped back, striking the stone. The world exploded into a blinding flash of white light, followed instantly by absolute, crushing darkness. It was cold, a cold so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest, sinking into his marrow. Izuku opened his eyes. He couldn't see anything. It was pitch black, save for a faint, ethereal blue glow emanating from the luminescent moss clinging to the damp cavern walls around him. He tried to move his arm. A symphony of pure, unadulterated agony ripped through his nervous system, so intense it made him vomit blood onto the freezing stones beside his face. He lay there, gasping, his breaths coming in short, ragged, wet wheezes. His left arm was dislocated and likely fractured. His right leg was bent at a gruesome, unnatural angle. Every breath felt like inhaling glass, his shattered ribs pressing dangerously close to his lungs. He was dying. He knew enough about anatomy from his martial arts training to know his body was shutting down. Internal bleeding. Shock. Hypothermia. So cold. Pathetic. The voice did not come from the cavern. It came from inside his own head. It wasn't Heihachi's voice. It was deeper. Smoother. It sounded like two stones grinding together, layered with a dark, velvet malice. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. "Who's there? You are dying, little boy," the voice whispered, echoing in the caverns of his mind. "Broken on the rocks like a discarded toy. He threw you away. Just like he threw your father away. Just like this world threw you away when they told you that you were quirkless." Izuku whimpered, a tear leaking from his eye, mixing with the blood on his cheek. "They told you that you were weak," the voice purred, seductive and dark. In the periphery of Izuku's fading vision, the shadows of the ravine seemed to coalesce, taking the faint, shifting shape of large, feathered wings. "Heihachi beats you. Your father abandoned you. The heroes you worship do not even know you exist. Why do you cling to their ideals? Why do you protect a world that has only ever offered you pain? Because..." Izuku thought weakly, "because it's the right thing to do." "Right. Wrong?" The voice laughed, a sound that chilled Izuku's soul. "There is only power. And those too weak to take it. I can give you power, Izuku. I can heal these broken bones. I can give you the strength to climb out of this pit and tear Heihachi Mishima limb from limb. I can give you the power to rule this world, to make them all bow down and apologize for ever looking at you with pity." Deep within Izuku's chest, where his heart struggled to beat, a strange warmth began to bloom. It wasn't a comforting warmth. It was a dark, suffocating heat. The devil gene. It was waking up, feeding on his physical trauma and the sheer, overwhelming despair of his situation. He felt a sudden, terrifying urge to let go. To just give in. It would be so easy. To surrender to the hatred. To let the rage burn away the cold and the pain. He hated Heihachi. He hated the beatings. He hated the unfairness of it all. "Yes," the devil whispered. "Let it burn. Hate him. Hate them all. Let me out, and we will show them what a true monster looks like." Izuku felt a surge of energy flood his broken limbs. It was dark, violet energy. He could feel his bones trying to snap back into place, driven by a violent, unnatural regeneration. His left eye twitched, feeling as though it were burning like a hot coal. He was going to become like his father. He was going to become a demon. And then, an image flashed in his mind. It wasn't All Might. It wasn't a hero. It was his mother. Inko. He saw her sitting in their small apartment, knitting a sweater, humming a soft tune. He saw her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. He remembered the smell of Katsudon. He remembered her frantic, desperate screams as the Tekken force dragged him away. "Will you leave my mom alone? Will she be safe?" "It's okay, Mom. I'll go with him." He had made a choice that night. He had chosen to sacrifice himself to protect her. If he gave in to the devil now, if he allowed hatred to consume his soul and turn him into a monster just to survive, then that sacrifice meant nothing. He wouldn't be returning to her as her son. He would be returning as a nightmare. No. Izuku's right hand, unbroken but bloodied, clenched into a fist, scraping against the stone. What are you doing? The devil hissed, the warmth suddenly recoiling, turning sharp and hostile. Accept the power, or you will die here. No, Izuku whispered aloud, his voice cracking, tasting of blood and frost. I won't be a monster, fool. Hatred is your birthright, my birthright. Izuku wheezed, forcing his right eye open. Is my mother's kindness. My birthright, is my own will. He closed his eyes and visualized the dark, violet energy coursing through his veins. He didn't try to expel it, it was a part of him. His biology. But he refused to let the emotion of it dictate his soul. He fought the hatred. He dragged every ounce of love, of hope, of his desperate, unyielding desire to be a savior, and slammed it down onto the rising darkness. I will not hate. I will save. The internal struggle was cataclysmic. His body convulsed violently on the cavern floor. The dark purple aura trying to bleed from his pores suddenly violently shifted. The hatred was denied fuel, but the sheer, indomitable willpower of the boy sparked a different kind of reaction within the mutated Mishima genetics. A sharp, deafening crack echoed through the ravine, sounding like a thunderbolt striking the stone. Izuku gasped. His eyes snapped open. His left eye was not the glowing crimson of the devil. It remained its brilliant, emerald green. But dancing across his pupil was a web of pure, blinding electricity. Sparks began to leap off his broken body. But it wasn't the dark purple of Heihachi, nor the black crimson of Kanzuya. It was a brilliant, searing emerald green, edged with a blinding white-blue core. The color of his hair. The color of his eyes. The color of his own, unique soul. The green lightning surged through his nervous system. It acted like a divine defibrillator, forcefully jump-starting his failing organs. It didn't heal his bones like the devil's dark regeneration would have, but it did something else. It numbed the pain, flooding his muscles with a terrifying, absolute adrenaline. Izuku let out a long, ragged scream, not of despair, but of raw, untethered defiance. Using his right arm, he pushed himself up. His left arm dangled uselessly. His right leg screamed in protest, but the green electricity coiled around the broken femur like an invisible splint, locking the muscles in place to support his weight. He stood. He looked up at the sheer, vertical cliff face he had just fallen down. It was thousands of feet of ice and jagged rock. You cannot climb it, the devil whispered, though its voice was now weak, pushed down into the deepest recesses of his mind by the overwhelming surge of green lightning. You are broken. Izuku didn't answer. He dragged himself to the base of the wall. He reached up with his good right hand, his fingers sinking into a crack in the ice. Green electricity flared from his knuckles, shattering the ice and biting deep into the stone beneath for a secure hold. He pulled himself up. 1 foot. He dug the toe of his heavy, ruined boot into the rock face. He used his teeth to grab the fabric of his left sleeve, biting down to endure the agony as he forcefully swung his dislocated left arm up, hooking his wrist over a jagged outcropping. 2 feet. The climb was not an act of physical prowess. It was an act of biological impossibility. By all medical logic, Izuku Midoriya should have been dead, but the boy possessed a willpower that eclipsed human limits, fueled by a genetic mutation that fed on his absolute refusal to surrender. Hour after hour, he climbed. The sun set, plunging the ravine into absolute darkness, illuminated only by the rhythmic, strobe-like flashes of Izuku's green lightning as he struck the stone. The wind battered him, trying to tear him off the wall. The cold froze the blood on his face. His muscles tore. His lungs burned. But he kept moving. Left arm hook. Right hand strike. Drag the broken leg up. Push. I am here. I am here. I am here. It became his mantra, timed with every strike of his fist against the mountain. He wasn't saying it like All Might did, to reassure others. He was saying it to reassure himself. He was still alive. He was still himself. As dawn broke, painting the highest peaks of the Alps in shades of pale gold and bruised purple, Heihachi Mishima stood at the edge of the plateau, looking down into the ravine. He had stood there all night. Waiting. He had expected to see a dark, winged shadow rocket up from the abyss. He had expected the devil to ascend, screaming for blood. But nothing had come. Heihachi let out a slow, disappointed breath. His breath plumed in the freezing air. So, the old man muttered, closing his eyes. The boy was weak after all. A pity. He had excellent form. Heihachi turned away, preparing to walk back to the helicopter to order the pilot to return to the estate. Crack! Heihachi stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes snapped open. That wasn't the sound of cracking ice. That was the sound of ozone splitting. He slowly turned back toward the edge of the cliff. A bloodied, bruised hand reached up from over the precipice and slammed flat onto the snowy plateau. The hand was trembling violently, the fingernails completely torn away, the knuckles raw and exposed. But dancing across the battered flesh were fierce, crackling arcs of emerald-green electricity. Heihachi's eyes widened in genuine, unprecedented shock. Slowly, agonizingly, Izuku Midoriya pulled himself over the edge. He dragged his broken body onto the flat, snowy ground. He didn't have wings. He didn't have horns. He was just a boy, battered almost beyond recognition, his winter coat in bloody rags. Izuku lay on the snow for a moment, panting heavily, his breath sounding like a dying engine. Heihachi stood frozen, watching. The old warlord's mind raced. The boy had survived the fall without awakening the devil. He had climbed back up with a shattered body using sheer, unfathomable willpower. And the electricity, it was the Mishima aura, undoubtedly, but it was pure. Uncorrupted by hatred. Izuku slowly pushed himself up. He couldn't stand. His broken leg finally gave out, and he fell to his knees. He knelt in the snow, his head bowed, his chest heaving, his body surrounded by a mesmerizing halo of green and white lightning that hissed against the falling snow. Heihachi took a slow step forward, a massive, uncharacteristic grin splitting his scarred face. It was not the smile of a grandfather relieved his grandson was alive. It was the smile of a warlord who had just found the ultimate weapon. You defied the devil, Heihachi whispered, all bleeding into his gravelly voice. You conquered the abyss with your own spirit. Heihachi let out a booming laugh that echoed across the mountaintops. Magnificent! You are a true anomaly, Izuku. You have the durability of a demon and the spirit of a god. You are the heir of the Iron Fist. Izuku slowly raised his head. His face was a mask of dried blood and frostbite. His emerald eyes, glowing faintly with lingering static, locked onto Heihachi. There was no hatred in them, but there was no fear either. Only a cold, absolute resolve. I survived, Izuku gasped, his voice raspy but unshakable. I win. Izuku pitched forward, finally succumbing to the trauma, and collapsed unconscious into the snow. The green lightning faded, leaving only a broken boy in the freezing wind. Heihachi looked down at him. For the first time in his life, Heihachi Mishima felt a twinge of something akin to respect. He reached down, carefully picking the broken boy up in his massive arms. Yes, you did, boy, Heihachi murmured. You win. 3 years later, the executive boardroom on the top floor of the Mishima Zaibatsu headquarters in Tokyo was a testament to raw, unchecked corporate power. A massive, polished mahogany table stretched across a room enclosed entirely in bulletproof glass, offering a panoramic, vertigo-inducing view of the sprawling metropolis below. At the head of the table sat Heihachi Mishima, dressed in a sharp, pinstripe suit that barely contained his muscular frame. He was reviewing a dossier on G Corporation's latest stock movements. The heavy oak doors at the end of the room swung open. Sir, a Zaibatsu secretary announced, bowing deeply. He is here. Heihachi didn't look up from his papers. Send him in. Footsteps echoed against the marble floor. They were measured, confident, lacking the heavy, aggressive stomp of a Tekken Force soldier, but carrying an undeniable weight. Izuku Midoriya stopped at the opposite end of the long table. He was 15 years old. The 3 years since the cliff had transformed him. He was no longer a small, fragile boy. He had shot up in height, his frame filling out with dense, perfectly sculpted muscle, hidden beneath the immaculate tailoring of a dark gray, three-piece suit. His green hair was longer now, styled neatly but retaining its wild curls. His face was handsome, but possessed a striking, cold intensity. A faint, thin white scar ran across the bridge of his nose, a permanent memento of the pine tree on the cliff face. He stood perfectly straight, his hands clasped behind his back, radiating a calm, terrifying stillness. "Grandfather," Izuku said, his voice deep, smooth, and utterly composed. Heihachi finally looked up, tossing the dossier onto the table. He appraised Izuku with a critical, appreciative eye. The boy had absorbed everything: the martial arts, the corporate strategy, the military tactics. He was a prodigy. A perfect, lethal machine wrapped in a polite facade. "Izuku," Heihachi rumbled. "The preparations for the King of Iron Fist Tournament 4 are underway. As my appointed heir, you will oversee the European qualifiers. I expect you to crush any G-Corp operatives attempting to infiltrate the roster." Izuku did not nod. He simply stared at Heihachi. "I will not be going to Europe, grandfather," Izuku stated calmly. Heihachi's eyebrows knitted together in a dangerous scowl. "Excuse me? I have fulfilled my end of our bargain," Izuku continued, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than defying the most dangerous man on earth. "I survived the cliff. I mastered the Mishima style. I have spent the last 3 years executing your corporate acquisitions and leading the Tekken force on precision strikes against G-Corporation black sites. I am the heir you demanded." Izuku slowly unclasped his hands and placed them flat on the polished mahogany table. "But you are forgetting the condition I set on the plateau 3 years ago, before I passed out." Heihachi's scowl deepened. "You said I win?" "Exactly," Izuku nodded slightly. "I won. Which means I dictate the next phase of my life." Izuku reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the long table. It glided over the polished wood, stopping perfectly in front of Heihachi. Heihachi picked it up. It was a standardized application form. UA High School Department of Heroics. Applicant, Izuku Midoriya. Heihachi stared at the paper as if it were coated in poison. He let out a slow, rumbling growl. "A hero's school. You are 15 years old, the heir to the most powerful military-industrial complex on the planet, capable of snapping the necks of seasoned mercenaries with your bare hands. And you still want to play dress-up with these caped fools? It is not a negotiation, grandfather," Izuku said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy, smelling faintly of ozone. Faint, emerald sparks danced across Izuku's knuckles resting on the table. "I will attend UA High School. I will become a licensed pro-hero." Heihachi stood up, placing his hands on the table, leaning forward. His purple aura flared, challenging Izuku's green lightning. The glass windows of the boardroom vibrated slightly from the clash of their raw energy. "And if I forbid it?" Heihachi challenged. "If I order the Tekken force to lock you in the estate?" Izuku did not flinch. He met Heihachi's glare with absolute, unbreakable resolve. "Then I will break through them," Izuku replied coolly. "I will shatter the gates. And I will walk to Mizuta for myself. You trained me to be unstoppable, grandfather. Do not be surprised when I refuse to be stopped." Heihachi stared at the boy. For a long, tense moment, the boardroom felt like a powder keg about to ignite. Then, surprisingly, the pressure in the room vanished. Heihachi's aura dissipated, and the old warlord let out a sharp, barking laugh. "Ha! The arrogance! The sheer, unadulterated Mishima arrogance!" Heihachi slammed his hand on the table, grinning fiercely. "You look me in the eye and threaten my own army. Beautiful." Heihachi picked up the UA application, studying it with a new, calculating gaze. The gears of his strategic mind turned rapidly. UA High School, Heihachi mused aloud, stroking his mustache. The premier institution for heroics. Home to All Might and the future leaders of this quirk-obsessed society. Currently, public opinion of the Mishima Zaibatsu is tumultuous. The media paints us as warmongers. But, Heihachi looked at Izuku, a dark, brilliant realization dawning in his eyes. If the heir to the Mishima Zaibatsu were to attend their precious school, if you were to become a shining, officially licensed hero in the public eye, the PR value would be astronomical. You would be a Trojan horse. A Mishima, loved by the masses, operating within the very system that usually opposes us. It would legitimize our military actions under the guise of heroic intervention. Izuku kept his expression perfectly neutral, though a sliver of ice formed in his gut. He didn't care about PR. He didn't care about the Zaibatsu's public image. He just wanted to save people. He wanted to reclaim the dream that had been stolen from him when he was 4 years old. If letting Heihachi think this was a political maneuver was what it took to get out of this compound, Izuku would play the game. Consider it an investment, Izuku said smoothly. My presence at UA will integrate the Zaibatsu into the Hero Public Safety Commission's good graces. But I will do it my way. Heihachi chuckled, pulling a gold-plated pen from his breast pocket. He signed his name at the bottom of the form as Izuku's legal guardian. Very well, Izuku, Heihachi said, tossing the form back across the table. You may attend UA High School. You may play the hero. But remember this. Heihachi's smile vanished, replaced by the grim visage of the Iron Dictator. You carry the Mishima blood. You carry the Devil's Curse, no matter how deeply you bury it beneath your green lightning. You can put on a cape, you can smile for the cameras, but when the time comes, you will be forced to choose. And you will find that the world of heroes is far more fragile than you think. Izuku picked up the signed application, folding it neatly and placing it back into his jacket pocket. I know exactly how fragile it is, grandfather, Izuku said quietly, thinking of a yellow umbrella, a crying mother, and a shattered action figure. That is exactly why I'm going to protect it. Izuku turned on his heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. His mind was already racing, looking ahead to the entrance exam, to the city he hadn't seen in over a decade. He was returning to Muzutafu, not as a quirkless, crying boy, but as a weapon. Oh, and Izuku, Heihachi called out just as Izuku reached the door. Izuku paused, glancing over his shoulder. Do try not to accidentally kill any of your little classmates, Heihachi smirked. It would be a logistical nightmare to clean up. Izuku's eyes hardened. I don't kill, grandfather. You taught me how to fight. I'm going to UA to learn how to save. With that, Izuku pushed through the doors, stepping out of the shadowy boardroom and into the blinding light of the hallway, ready to face a world that wasn't ready for a hero with an iron fist. The morning air of Muzutafu was crisp, carrying the faint, salty tang of the distant ocean and the overwhelming scent of cherry blossoms preparing to bloom. For the thousands of teenagers converging on the massive, sprawling campus of UA High School, it was the smell of anxiety, hope, and the terrifying precipice of the future. For 15-year-old Izuku Midoriya, it smelled like freedom. But freedom, he had learned over the last 11 years, was never a simple thing. It was always guarded, always weighed down by strings and expectations. The UA entrance was a bottleneck of bustling students, nervous murmurs, and the flashing cameras of local press hoping to catch a glimpse of the next big hero prodigy. The sheer scale of the golden gates, arching toward the sky, was meant to inspire all. Yet, to Izuku, who had spent a decade walking through gates guarded by anti-aircraft turrets and heavily armed mercenaries, Yui felt incredibly soft, vulnerable. A collective gasp suddenly rippled through the crowd near the front gates. The nervous chatter died down, replaced by a sudden, tense silence, followed by frantic whispering. A convoy of four matte black, heavily armored SUVs had pulled up directly to the curb of the main entrance. They were not the sleek, stylish cars of high-ranking pro-heroes. They were military-grade vehicles, with reinforced run-flat tires, tinted ballistic glass, and reinforced steel plating. The doors of the first and last vehicles swung open in perfect unison. 12 men stepped out. They were clad in the terrifying, dark green and black tactical samurai armor of the Tekken Force. Their faces were hidden behind menacing, red-visored Oni masks. They carried themselves not like security guards, but like soldiers occupying a hostile territory. They moved with blinding speed, immediately forming a secure perimeter around the second SUV in the convoy. Their hands resting casually but threateningly near the custom batons and suppressed sidearms holstered at their waists. The aspiring heroes and the press stumbled backward, a wave of palpable fear washing over them. Villains? Someone whispered frantically. No, look at the insignia on the doors. That's the Mishima Zaibatsu. What is the private military of a global megacorp doing at a high school? The rear passenger door of the center SUV opened. The captain of the Tekken Force squad stepped forward, offering a gloved hand. But the hand was ignored. Izuku Midoriya stepped out into the morning light. He didn't wear a middle school uniform like the rest of the applicants. He wore a bespoke, tailored dark charcoal track suit over a fitted black t-shirt. The material was a cutting-edge ballistic polymer developed by Zaibatsu RD, designed to breathe like silk but absorb the impact of a low-caliber bullet. He carried a single, nondescript black duffel bag slung over his right shoulder. He looked around, his brilliant emerald eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't see teenagers. His brain, hardwired by Heihachi's brutal tutelage, automatically calculated threat levels. 3 heteromorphic quirks, primarily strength-based. 1 emitter, sparks on the fingertips, possible fire or electricity. The crowd is dense, no clear sight lines. A tactical nightmare. Izuku blinked, forcing his posture to relax. Stop it. You aren't in a war zone. This is a school. Young Master Izuku, the Tekken Force captain said, his mechanically filtered voice low and respectful. We have secured the perimeter. Awaiting your command to escort you to the examination auditorium. We have a detail ready to sweep the building for. No, Izuku said softly. His voice was not loud, but it carried an eerie, commanding resonance that instantly silenced the captain. Sir? The captain asked, a hint of confusion leaking through the modulator. You are drawing attention, Captain, Izuku said, turning to face the armored soldier. He stood perfectly straight, his expression an unreadable mask of stoic calm. I am here to take a high school entrance exam, not annex a small country. Your presence here contradicts the image I am trying to project. Grand Master Heihachi's orders were strict, sir. We are to ensure your absolute safety. Izuku's eyes hardened, a flash of cold emerald cutting through the morning light. And my orders are for you to return to the Tokyo compound immediately. If any hostile force in the city is capable of bypassing me to cause me harm, your squad would be dead before you even unholstered your weapons. Go home, Captain. The captain hesitated. Defying Heihachi was a death sentence. But standing before him was the heir. And every soldier in the Tekken Force knew the stories of what the young master could do in the dojo. The captain bowed deeply at the waist. Understood, young master. Best of luck on your examination. With a series of sharp hand signals, the Tekken Force fell back into the SUVs. The engines roared to life, and within seconds, the convoy sped away, leaving Izuku standing entirely alone on the curb. The crowd of students stared at him, wide-eyed and terrified. The whispers intensified. That's him? That's the Mishima heir? He looks so normal. But his eyes are scary. I heard the Zaibatsu kills people who look at them wrong. Izuku ignored them. He took a slow, deep breath, letting the scent of the cherry blossoms override the phantom smells of ozone and blood that usually haunted his memories. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and began to walk up the long, paved pathway toward the main building of UA High. As he walked, the crowd naturally parted for him, treating him like a great white shark swimming through a school of minnows. He kept his gaze fixed on the massive glass doors of the school. He felt a strange flutter in his chest. It wasn't the cold, calculated adrenaline of combat. It was excitement. For the first time in his life, he was doing something he chose to do. Hey! Get out of my way, you damn extras! The loud, abrasive voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a chainsaw. Izuku paused, his highly trained ears twitching. He knew that voice. It was deeper now, rougher, but the sheer, arrogant cadence of it was permanently etched into his earliest childhood memories. Izuku turned his head slightly. Stomping up the pathway, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his baggy black middle school uniform, was Katsuki Bakugo. His spiky, ash-blonde hair was exactly the same. His permanent scowl, directed at the world as if it were an inconvenience, hadn't changed a bit. Bakugo was glaring at the students scrambling out of his way, completely oblivious to the tension Izuku had just created. But as Bakugo walked forward, his crimson eyes locked onto the boy standing perfectly still in the middle of the path. Bakugo stopped. He squinted. The green curly hair. The freckles dusting the cheeks. The face was sharper, the jawline much more defined, and the kid was significantly taller and broader in the shoulders than Bakugo remembered, but the core features were undeniable. Deku? Bakugo breathed out, the word tasting like bile on his tongue. Izuku fully turned to face him. 11 years. It had been 11 years since he had seen Katsuki Bakugo. The last memory Izuku had of him was playing in a sandbox, just days before the doctor's diagnosis, days before the attack, days before the cliff. In Izuku's mind, Bakugo was a ghost from a past life that had been violently murdered. "Hello, Katsuki," Izuku said, his voice polite, even, and entirely devoid of emotion. Bakugo's shock instantly morphed into explosive, unadulterated rage. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. Small, crackling sparks of nitroglycerin popped across his palms. "What the hell are you doing here?" Bakugo shouted, stomping toward Izuku. The surrounding students gasped, backing away even further to give the two boys a wide berth. "I haven't seen your quirkless, useless face in a decade. Everyone thought you and your mom were dead. And now you show up here? At UA?" Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't drop into a stance. He just stood there, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. "I am here to take the entrance exam, Katsuki. Just like you. Like hell you are." Bakugo sneered, closing the distance until he was barely 2 feet away from Izuku. He leaned in, his teeth bared in a feral grin. "This is the top hero academy in the country. They don't take quirkless defects like you. You think just because you disappeared and got a little taller you can stand on the same stage as me? You're mocking me just by breathing the same air, Deku." Izuku looked at the angry blonde. He saw the pride, the fragile ego, the utter reliance on a genetic lottery ticket. Bakugo was strong, yes. Izuku could see the muscular definition in Bakugo's forearms, the way he balanced his weight. But to Izuku, who had fought men 3 times Bakugo's size to the death, the explosive boy looked like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. "I am not mocking you, Katsuki," Izuku said quietly. "I am simply taking a path. If you happen to be on it, that is your concern, not mine." The sheer, dismissive apathy in Izuku's voice was the ultimate insult to Bakugo. "Don't look down on me!" Bakugo roared. Driven by instinct and bruised pride, Bakugo's right hand whipped forward. He didn't intend to kill Izuku, but he fully intended to blast him with enough explosive force to burn his clothes and send him flying backward, a harsh reminder of his place. A bright, fiery explosion erupted from Bakugo's palm, aimed directly at Izuku's chest. The crowd screamed. To Katsuki Bakugo, the strike was fast. To Izuku Midoriya, time dilated into a crawl. Izuku's eyes tracked the micro-movements of Bakugo's shoulder. He saw the ignition of the sweat glands. He calculated the trajectory of the blast, the kinetic force, and the heat expansion in a millisecond. Izuku didn't step back. He stepped in. With a movement so fast the human eye could barely register it as a blur, Izuku raised his left arm. He didn't block the explosion head-on. Mishima-style karate was not just about brute force. It was about the absolute control of physics. Izuku's forearm connected with Bakugo's wrist a microsecond before the explosion fully blossomed. Using a circular parrying motion, Izuku flawlessly redirected the kinetic momentum of Bakugo's arm upward and outward. The explosion fired harmlessly into the sky above them with a loud boom, leaving a trail of black smoke. But Izuku wasn't done. The parry had thrown Bakugo's entire center of gravity off. In the exact same fluid motion, Izuku slid his right foot forward, slipping inside Bakugo's guard, and gently, with terrifying, calculated restraint, placed his open right palm flat against the center of Bakugo's chest. Izuku didn't push. He simply locked his arm and grounded his stance. The sheer, immovable kinetic wall of Izuku's posture met Bakugo's forward momentum. The result was instantaneous. Bakugo gasped as the breath was driven from his lungs. His feet left the ground, and he stumbled backward, tripping over his own boots. He fell hard onto his rear on the pavement, his eyes wide with absolute shock. Silence descended upon the courtyard. The applicant crowd was paralyzed. Bakugo sat on the ground, staring at his smoking right hand, then up at Izuku. His brain could not compute what had just happened. Deku, the quirkless, crying weakling, had just completely neutralized his attack and put him on his ass without even throwing a punch. Izuku looked down at Bakugo. There was no smugness in his expression. No triumph. Just the cold, clinical look of a martial artist who had corrected a flawed technique. "Your swing is telegraphed," Izuku said, his voice entirely calm. You rely too heavily on the concussive force of your quirk to mask the lack of proper footwork. If you overextend like that in a real fight, someone will break your elbow. Izuku adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, stepped neatly around the stunned Bakugo, and continued his walk toward the auditorium doors. It was nice seeing you, Katsuki, Izuku called back over his shoulder, not looking back. Good luck on the exam. Bakugo sat there, his hands shaking, his mind vibrating with a confusing, nauseating mix of humiliation, rage, and a terrifying new emotion he had never associated with Deku, fear. The written portion of the exam was, frankly, insulting to Izuku's intelligence. The Mishima Zaibatsu did not merely train fighters. They cultivated generals, CEOs, and global tacticians. From the age of 6, between his beatings in the dojo, Izuku had been subjected to grueling academic tutoring by the brightest minds G Corporation defectors and Zaibatsu loyalists had to offer. He was fluent in 6 languages, understood advanced geopolitics, quantum physics, and military logistics. A high school mathematics test and Japanese history quiz took him exactly 22 minutes to complete flawlessly. He spent the remaining hour of the allotted time sitting perfectly still at his desk, analyzing the structural integrity of the classroom and memorizing the faces, tics, and potential physical capabilities of every student in the room. When it was time for the orientation, Izuku found himself seated in a massive, darkened auditorium. On the stage stood the voice hero, Present Mike. What's up, UA candidates? Present Mike screamed into the microphone, striking a dynamic pose. Can I get a yeah? Silence. The applicants were too nervous to respond. Izuku watched the hero with clinical detachment. Present Mike, quirk voice. Capable of generating high-frequency sound waves. Highly destructive in enclosed spaces. Tactically, he is a walking sonic artillery unit. However, his flamboyant persona leaves him wide open for a speed blitz assassination. If I close the distance within 1.5 seconds, I could crush his larynx before he takes a breath. Izuku blinked, shaking his head slightly. Stop. Assassination is not the goal. Focus on the rules. Present Mike detailed the practical exam. It was a mock urban battle. The applicants would be dropped into massive replica cities and tasked with destroying robotic villains to accumulate points. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers. It was a point-based annihilation mission. Izuku felt a grim sense of familiarity settle over him. Search and destroy. A combat gauntlet. Finally, something straightforward. Excuse me, sir. A tall, broad-shouldered applicant with blue hair and glasses suddenly stood up, his arm raised like a rigid flagpole. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains, not 3. The boy projected loudly. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. We examinees are here in this place because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes. The boy then dramatically turned around, pointing an accusing finger directly at the aisle, toward where Izuku was sitting next to Katsuki Bakugo. He didn't point at Izuku, however. He pointed at a boy with curly purple hair a few rows down who had been muttering nervously. But Izuku's eyes tracked the motion. Rigid posture. Loud, commanding voice. Obsessed with rules and protocol, Izuku analyzed. He moves like a machine. A high-speed quirk? He reminds me of Heihachi's lieutenants, but without the bloodlust. Present Mike defused the situation, explaining that the 4th robot was a 0-pointer, an obstacle meant to be avoided, a massive gimmick designed to rampage through tight spaces. A natural disaster simulator, Izuku deduced. An unkillable threat meant to test situational awareness and retreat protocols. Logical. With the rules established, the applicants were dismissed to change and board buses to their respective testing grounds. Ground Beta was a breathtaking testament to UA's absurd budget. Standing before the massive, towering metal gates, Izuku felt as though he had been transported into a completely real, thriving metropolis. Skyscrapers, paved roads, alleyways, traffic lights. It was a perfect concrete jungle. Izuku stood near the front of the pack, stretching his neck side to side. A satisfying pop echoed from his vertebrae. He had changed into a sleeker version of his tracksuit, a form-fitting, sleeveless black compression shirt that showcased his heavily scarred, muscular arms and loose, reinforced charcoal pants ending in steel-toed combat boots. He wore fingerless leather gloves with weighted metallic plating across the knuckles. He ignored the stares of the other applicants. They were whispering about him again, likely having heard about the incident at the front gates with the Tekken force, or witnessing his brief confrontation with Bakugo. Izuku scanned the crowd, cataloging his competitors. His eyes paused on a girl a few yards away. She had a round, soft face, short brown bobbed hair, and rosy cheeks. She was wearing a pink and black jumpsuit. She looked incredibly nervous, taking deep, hyperventilating breaths, slapping her cheeks with both hands to hype herself up. Izuku recognized her. She had been the one to catch a green-haired boy who tripped at the front gates earlier. Wait, that boy wasn't him. Izuku had seen her help someone else. She had a quirk that negated gravity. A dangerous, lethal quirk if used aggressively, yet she used it to keep a stranger from scraping his knees. A kind heart, Izuku thought. A true hero candidate. Start. Present mixed voice boomed from the hidden speakers, entirely unprompted. The crowd of applicants jumped, startled by the sudden announcement. They hesitated, looking around in confusion. Izuku did not hesitate. Decade-old reflexes, drilled into his nervous system through thousands of hours of violent combat training, activated instantly. The gates were barely opening, a gap of perhaps 3 feet wide, when Izuku moved. He didn't just run. He exploded. Izuku dropped his center of gravity dangerously low, and pushed off his back foot with enough kinetic force to crack the pavement beneath his steel-toed boot. He moved in a terrifying, erratic sprint, a rapid succession of high-speed crouch dashes known in his family as the Mishima wave dash. To the onlookers, he looked like a blur of black and green, seemingly gliding across the asphalt while keeping his head perfectly level, making him an impossible target to track. He shot through the narrow gap in the gates before they were even halfway open. "What are you waiting for?" Present Mike screamed from the speakers. "There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run!" The applicants panicked, finally surging forward into the city. But by the time they crossed the threshold, Izuku was already a block away, executing a symphony of destruction. Izuku rounded the corner of a main street, and came face to face with a squad of 3 robots. 2 one-pointers and a 2-pointer. They turned their glowing red optical sensors toward him. Target acquired, the robotic voices droned. Izuku didn't slow down. He accelerated. The first one-pointer raised its metallic arm, ready to strike. Izuku slid on his knees beneath the lumbering swing, rising in a fluid motion directly in front of the machine's chassis. Flash punch combo. His fists were a blur. A left jab shattered the machine's primary optical sensor. A lightning-fast right straight caved in the neck plating, and a devastating, pivoting left hook struck the center of its chest, tearing through the metal chassis and severing the main power conduit. The one-pointer crumpled to the ground, sparks showering the street. 1 point, Izuku calculated in his head. The second one-pointer charged from his flank. Izuku didn't even look at it. He pivoted on his heel and launched a devastating back kick, driving the steel toe of his boot completely through the robot's knee joint. As the machine collapsed forward, Izuku caught its falling head, used the momentum to spin, and hurled the heavy robot directly into the advancing 2-pointer. Both machines crashed into a tangled, sparking heap of scrap metal. 4 points. Total elapsed time since the gates opened, 12 seconds. Izuku didn't pause to admire his work. He was a ghost in the urban battlefield. He utilized the environment perfectly, while running up alleyways to drop down on 3-pointers, executing bone-shattering demon uppercuts that lifted the massive machines off the ground and shattered their internal gyros. He didn't use a drop of his green lightning. He didn't need the Devil Gene's raw power to fight mere machines. He used pure, unadulterated Mishima-style fighting karate. His strikes were so precise, so overwhelmingly powerful, that the robots were being dismantled as if they were made of cheap plastic. The other applicants in his sector soon began to realize a terrifying truth. There were no robots left for them to fight. A group of 3 students ran down a main boulevard, panting heavily. "Where are they all?" A boy with a stretching quirk yelled. "I've only got 5 points." Suddenly, a loud, metallic screech echoed from the next intersection. A massive 3-pointer flew horizontally across the street, completely airborne, before crashing through the front window of a full bank building. The students stopped in their tracks, staring in horror as Izuku Midoriya walked out from the intersection, casually wiping a smudge of engine oil off his knuckle. He didn't even look winded. 54 points, Izuku muttered to himself. He glanced at the terrified students. He recognized the panic in their eyes. They needed points to pass. Izuku nodded politely to them. The eastern block seems densely populated with 2-pointers. I'll leave them to you. Without waiting for a response, Izuku vanished into an alleyway with blinding speed, high above the mock cities. In a darkened observation room filled with massive glowing monitors, the faculty of UA High School watched the carnage unfold in silence. Pro heroes like Midnight, Snipe, and Cementos scribbled notes on their clipboards. But the atmosphere in the room was incredibly tense. Almost all eyes were glued to a single monitor displaying the feed from ground beta. In the center of the room sat a skeletal, emaciated man with unruly blonde hair, wearing a suit that was several sizes too large for him. Toshinori Yagi, the true form of the symbol of peace, All Might, stared at the screen, his sunken blue eyes wide with a mixture of awe and deep, unsettling concern. This year's crop is promising, Principal Nizu, the small, incredibly intelligent animal hybrid, noted from his high chair, sipping a cup of tea. Many excellent quirks. Good situational awareness. But, I believe we have a rather unique anomaly in ground beta. Anomaly is an understatement, Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, drawled, leaning against the back wall, wrapped in his capturing scarf. His tired eyes were locked onto Izuku's feed. Look at his movements. There's no wasted kinetic energy. No hesitation. He's not fighting like a kid taking a test. He's fighting like a veteran soldier clearing a hot zone. Midoriya, Izuku, Midnight read from a glowing tablet, her brow furrowed. Quirk registry, none. It says here he's legally quirkless. Quirkless? Snipe scoffed beneath his mask. Look at him. He just punched a 2-ton robot through a brick wall. That's a strength enhancement quirk if I've ever seen one. It's not, Aizawa countered, his voice flat. Look at the telemetry data on the robots he destroys. There's no residual energy signature. No heat variance, no gravitational shifts. It's pure, unadulterated physical impact. Martial arts pushed to a terrifying, metahuman extreme. Aizawa turned his gaze to Nizu. Who is this kid? Nizu placed his teacup down, his usually cheerful demeanor sobering. He is the legal ward and registered heir of Heihachi Mishima. The Mishima Zaibatsu. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Every pro-hero present knew that name. The Zaibatsu was a geopolitical nightmare, a private military corporation with enough firepower and influence to destabilize entire continents. They operated in the gray areas of international law, often clashing with pro-heroes in foreign territories. The Mishima heir? Midnight whispered, genuinely shocked. What the hell is the Zaibatsu doing sending their crown prince to a hero school? Is this a political stunt? Undoubtedly, Nizu nodded. Heihachi Mishima is likely using the boy to garner good public relations. To legitimize their operations, Toshinori Yagi gripped the armrests of his chair. He stared intently at the screen. He watched Izuku dismantle another robot, his face completely devoid of the manic joy or desperate fear usually seen in kids his age. The boy looked empty. Like a perfectly programmed weapon. A child molded by Heihachi Mishima, Toshinori thought, a sickening feeling twisting in his gut. A boy raised in a world of absolute, ruthless violence. And he's quirkless, yet he possesses this much power. What did they do to him? He's racked up 70 points in under 5 minutes, Aizawa noted, sounding almost bored, though his eyes betrayed his intense focus. He's secured first place by a massive margin. Let's see how he reacts to something he can't just punch his way through. Aizawa reached forward and flipped a red switch on the control console, released the 0-pointers. Back in ground beta, Izuku stood in the center of a wide intersection, taking a slow, measured breath. 68 points. It was more than enough to secure a passing grade. He had accomplished his objective. Suddenly, the ground beneath his boots trembled. It wasn't a minor tremor. It was a localized, violent earthquake. The faux buildings around him groaned, glass shattering in the windows as the structural integrity of the street was compromised. A shadow fell over the intersection, blotting out the morning sun. Izuku looked up. Rising from the center of the city, crushing a 3-story building beneath its massive treads, was the zero-pointer. It was a colossal, terrifying monstrosity of steel and military engineering. It stood easily the size of a skyscraper, its single, glowing red eye sweeping over the street below like a lighthouse of doom. Obstacle, a booming, mechanical voice echoed from the giant. A massive metal fist, the size of a city bus, slammed into the pavement a block away, sending a shockwave of concrete and debris flying in all directions. Panic erupted. The applicants, who had been confidently hunting smaller robots, suddenly broke and ran for their lives. Run! Are you kidding me? That thing is huge. Time is almost up. Just get away from it. Izuku stood his ground, analyzing the behemoth. Colossal scale. Tremendous destructive capability. However, it's slow. Its sheer mass makes it a lumbering target. The logical move is to retreat. There are no points to be gained here, only unnecessary risk. Izuku turned his back on the machine, preparing to follow the other students toward the extraction zone. He had proven his point. He didn't need to show off, but as he took a step, a sound cut through the chaos of falling rubble and screaming teenagers. Ow, someone, help me! Izuku stopped dead. His ears twitched. He turned his head, his emerald eyes scanning the dust and debris rapidly expanding from the zero-pointer's path of destruction. 50 yards away, near the epicenter of the robot's stomping tread, a massive slab of concrete had fallen. Pinned beneath it, desperately trying to push the heavy stone off her legs, was the round-faced girl with the gravity quirk. Uraraka. She looked up at the looming shadow of the zero-pointer's treads slowly rising into the air, preparing to crush the street, and her, into dust. Her eyes were wide with absolute, paralyzing terror. The other applicants were running right past her. They were looking out for themselves. In that fraction of a second, Izuku Midoriya's world stopped. He didn't hear the logical, tactical voice of Heihachi Mishima telling him to retreat. He didn't think about his score. He didn't think about the entrance exam. He saw a girl in danger. He saw the face of his mother, pinned by a mercenary's boot. He remembered the feeling of being completely, utterly powerless. He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what trouble they're in. The memory of the All Might video flashed in his mind. The dream he had buried in the snow on a frozen mountain 3 years ago violently resurrected itself. Izuku didn't think. He moved. He pivoted, planting his foot so hard the asphalt cratered beneath him. He rocketed forward, sprinting back toward the colossal monster. Up in the observation room, Toshinori Yagi shot out of his chair, coughing violently, his eyes wide. The other teachers gasped. What is he doing? Midnight cried out. He has enough points. He's going to get himself killed. But Izuku wasn't going to die. As he sprinted, a strange, terrifying sound began to emanate from his body. It sounded like 1,000 live wires snapping in a rainstorm. The air pressure around him instantly dropped, the air smelling sharply of ozone. His emerald eyes began to glow with a blinding, fierce light. Izuku leaped over a pile of rubble, closing the distance to Uraraka. The zero-pointer's massive tread was coming down. He wouldn't have time to pull the concrete off her and get them both clear. There was only one option. He had to destroy the obstacle. Izuku didn't slow down. He bounded off the hood of a crushed car, launching himself into the air, flying on a direct collision course toward the center of the zero-pointer's descending, skyscraper-sized face. Deep within him, the devil gene stirred, feeling the spike of adrenaline and the sheer, overwhelming intent to destroy. It offered him the dark, purple power of hatred. No, Izuku thought, his will absolute. I will not use you to kill. I will use this power to save. He violently rejected the dark aura. Instead, fueled by his pure, unadulterated desire to protect the girl on the ground, his body catalyzed the Mishima genetics into something entirely his own. Crack! A blinding, explosive aura of pure, emerald green electricity erupted from Izuku's body. It was so bright it cast violent, green shadows across the mock city. The lightning arched around his torso, spiraling down his right arm, coalescing into a violently humming sphere of plasma around his clenched fist. Uraraka, pinned on the ground, stopped struggling. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat as the sky was illuminated by the green lightning. She watched the boy she thought was just a scary, cold fighter soar through the air like an avenging angel. Izuku reached the apex of his jump, hovering perfectly in front of the massive, steel face of the zero-pointer. He pulled his right arm back. The green lightning shrieked, tearing at the fabric of his sleeve, demanding to be released. Izuku twisted his hips, funneling every ounce of kinetic energy, every year of agonizing training, and the full, untethered power of his brilliant, emerald lightning into a single point of impact. Electric! Izuku roared, his voice echoing over the city, loud and clear and utterly fearless. He drove his fist forward, directly into the thickest part of the robot's armor. Wind God Fist. The impact was not a punch. It was a localized natural disaster. The moment Izuku's fist connected with the steel, a blinding shockwave of green plasma and kinetic force exploded outward. The sound was deafening, a sonic boom that shattered every remaining window within a 3-block radius. The zero-pointer's head didn't just dent. It violently imploded. The kinetic force transferred through the chassis, rippling down the spine of the colossal machine. The armor plating tore itself apart from the inside out. Sparks, fire, and shattered metal erupted from the back of the robot's head in a massive, fiery cone. The sheer force of the blow halted the machine's forward momentum entirely. The zero-pointer groaned, a terrible sound of dying metal, and then slowly, violently, tilted backward, crashing down into the empty streets behind it, entirely annihilated. Izuku hung in the air for a moment amidst the falling debris, the green lightning slowly fading from his knuckles. He initiated a forward flip, managing his momentum, and landed in a perfect 3-point crouch on the cracked asphalt, a dozen yards away from Uraraka. Silence slammed back down over ground beta. The dust slowly began to settle. The remaining applicants stared in absolute, jaw-dropping disbelief. The massive, unkillable obstacle had just been one-shot by a boy using his bare hands. Izuku stood up. He let out a slow, controlled breath, exhaling a puff of steam into the warm morning air. He didn't look back at the destroyed robot. He walked over to Uraraka. The girl was staring up at him, her eyes wide as saucers, her mouth hanging open. She looked at his hands, expecting to see them broken and bloody, but they were perfectly fine. Izuku knelt down beside her. He reached out and grabbed the edge of the massive concrete slab pinning her legs. With a simple heave, utilizing his terrifying base strength, he tossed the slab aside as if it were made of cardboard. He offered her a hand. Uraraka hesitated for a second, then reached up, taking his hand. His skin was warm, calloused, but incredibly gentle. He pulled her to her feet easily. "Are you severely injured?" Izuku asked, his voice returning to its calm, polite cadence, though his eyes were softening, losing the cold edge of the soldier. My ankle is twisted," Uraraka stammered, wincing as she put weight on it. She looked at him, her face flushing slightly. You saved me. That was amazing. What was that?" "Your quirk is incredible." Izuku looked down at his right hand. The green lightning was gone, tucked safely away back into his soul. "It's not a quirk," Izuku said softly. "It's martial arts." Before Uraraka could even begin to process the impossibility of that statement, a loud buzzer echoed across the city. "Time's up," President Mike announced. "The practical exam is over." Izuku let out a small sigh. He turned away from the destruction, looking toward the exit gates. He had done it. He had taken the first step. He wasn't entirely sure what would happen next, or how Heihachi would react to him using the lightning to save someone rather than kill. But for the first time in his life, Izuku didn't care. Up in the observation room, the faculty was in an uproar. Aizawa was rapidly reviewing the footage, his tired eyes wide. But Toshinori Yagi didn't say a word. The symbol of peace stood by the window, staring at the monitor showing the green-haired boy helping the injured girl walk toward the exit. Toshinori placed a hand over his chest, over the old, festering wound that was slowly killing him. He had been looking for a successor. Someone with the heart of a true hero, willing to sacrifice themselves for others. He had expected to find a bright, optimistic student. He had not expected to find a child soldier of the Mishima Zaibatsu. "Heihachi Mishima claims you as his weapon, young Midoriya," Toshinori thought, a fierce, protective smile breaking across his skeletal face. But a weapon does not risk its own life to save a stranger. A weapon does not possess a heart that burns so brightly. Toshinori clenched his fist. Heihachi is wrong. You are no demon, my boy. You are a hero.